Podcasts are pretty common. So what makes the Uncommon podcast uncommon? Well, it's all in our name. I'm your host, Noah Weiss, and we at Uncommon Sports Group understand the unique pressures and temptations that come with a career in the sport industry. We provide uncommon training that helps you successfully navigate common challenges. Hit the follow button on this podcast. Follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Check out our website and become uncommon. USG, what's going on? Welcome back to another episode of the Uncommon Podcast. I'm Noah Weiss, your host, and I'm excited to have a special guest on today's episode with me, Jentry Mullins, an experienced sport industry professional who has worked with the likes of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the Phoenix Suns, the Cleveland Cavaliers, and more. Jentry, appreciate you joining me today.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Noah. Certainly appreciative, humbled to be here, and obviously love the mission of this podcast. So
absolutely, Jentry. And Jentry, I'm really excited for today because we're going to spend some time discussing what it takes to have a successful career within the college and professional sport industry. But I would love to start by having you share a little bit about your career journey and why you chose to work within the college and pro sport industry.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, hopefully I don't bore the listeners too much. But as I mentioned, I am originally from an extremely small town in rural Southwest Virginia, like right on the Kentucky border. I think my hometown was 3,000 people. I went to a college of about 2,000 people. And for me, I just was like, I love sports. I was watching the Sports Center Loop 3 hours in a row on Saturday mornings. Me and my dad and mom really bonded by going to sporting events. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of just the only thing that was like a consistent constant for me. And so it's like, it would be pretty cool to work in sports. And so for me, I was like, I'll probably work in like the minor leagues around my hometown, live in a big city like Johnson City, Tennessee, and, work for a minor league baseball team around, the area. And, I had a sports management concentration. Really my college degree wasn't really focused on, business. It was more of like how to become a PE teacher. And, there was like a couple business classes in there that I really kind of gravitated towards and thought those were really unique. Mm-hmm. And, luckily for me, like the best part of that, curriculum was that I had to do a summer internship. Yeah. And, for most of my classmates, like it was kind of like just to check the box, like let me do something quickly. Let me do like a weekend tennis tournament and kind of get on with my summer, or let me work at like the local like sporting goods store at like my hometown. And, for me, I was like, well, if I want to work in sports, I probably need to start actually having like a qualified internship to do this. Mm-hmm. And so I started Googling like minor league baseball internships around like, my hometown. And all of a sudden I came across Teamwork Online, which, is probably the most notable, job board in the sports industry. And, was just amazed at like all these pro sports jobs were just right there. It was like, I remember seeing the Atlanta Hawks and the Sacramento Kings. And I just started applying to every internship I could, whether it was community relations, human resources, corporate partnerships, group sales. And, I think I applied to 163 opportunities. No, I got one back.
Wow.
And it was a group sales internship for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And, honestly, I had no clue what sales was. Mm-hmm. To me, I just assumed that these buildings and these arenas and stadiums, they just filled up because like, who doesn't want to go to sporting events, right?
Right.
And, because every time you turn it on, it's full. So like, you never goes into your thought process of like, well, who actually put all those people there?
Yeah.
And, I was not really that qualified to get that internship. And just getting the email from the Buccaneers was like honestly good enough for me. My parents and me are like huge NFL fans. So, just to say that I got an email from the Buccaneers was crazy enough. But, during that process, like there was no one that was more prepared than me during those interviews. Yeah. I would lock myself in a room 2 hours prior and I had everybody's, background memorized. I knew the questions I was going to ask, kind of very similar to the stuff that you did with this podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And, I lucked my way into that internship.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I got there, spent a summer there, which was just the most transformative 3 months of my life.
It's amazing.
Went back, finished, my final year of school, actually graduated early just so I could get back down to Tampa.
Yeah.
Spent 2.5 years selling with the Buccaneers. This was when the Bucs were really bad. Like, we got the number 1 pick my second year there, which was when we drafted Jameis Winston. Then I went out to Phoenix for 2 years, really running their entry-level sales program.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, helping, a lot of college students get their first job in sports and kind of learn how to sell. Spent 2 years there, then 3 years went to the Cavaliers, like right after LeBron had left.
Wow.
And so it was one of those opportunities where a lot of people looked at it as a challenge. And I said, if we can rebuild a business after LeBron leaves, like, it's a pretty cool resume stamper.
That is.
And we did that. And so spent 3 years in Cleveland, went to the agency side for a year, really, helping, teams and companies all across the country in the sports vertical, really just like help improve the revenue operations, whether that through recruiting and executive search or through just consulting and leadership training or sales training, and loved it. And then, this opportunity here in Brooklyn was a special one. It kind of came out of nowhere with people that I really enjoyed. Mm-hmm. In a city that, I thought would really challenge me and stretch me. Yeah. And so we've been here in Brooklyn for a little over 3 months now. So awesome. It's a little bit about me.
That's awesome, Jentry. And I appreciate you sharing too. And I think your testimony about your career is inspiring because you come from a humble background, right? A small town guy. You were like minor leagues was going to be my cap. And obviously now you're looking at yourself with an organization like the Brooklyn Nets, BSE Global, obviously a very, very premier sales organization. So that's an incredible place to be. And so I think for our listeners, that's encouraging just in itself, of hearing where you've been and where God has taken you over the course of your career. And Jentry, kind of going off of what you talked about, of you applied to 163 internships, you got 1 email back. That's a common struggle throughout the sport industry. Many young professionals are struggling to find out, how can I separate myself from this pack of so many applicants for these positions? And so how can our listeners begin to do that? And how can they differentiate themselves to hopefully stand out in the hiring process?
Yeah, it's a great question, Noah, and I talk a lot about this on LinkedIn. To me, the interview process is more indicative of effort than it really is anything else. Mm-hmm. It's, and again, I think a lot of folks, like, we just don't know how much like effort can go into these things. And so, I'd say 95% of the people out there are just, checking the box, like they're applying for that job and they're kind of done with it, mm-hmm. And that's what I did. Yeah. Because I didn't know any better. Right. And so, when you're in that interview process, like, there's so many different ways to really differentiate yourself, like you're talking about. Mm-hmm. One is just that, like, it's that preparation, right? Like, you can show up to that call not knowing a single thing about that person, or you can show up to that call knowing everything about their background, mm-hmm. Their whole trajectory, and like, you're already ahead of that other person that didn't do any work on it. Mm-hmm. Right. And so that's just effort that you're willing to put in the front end because you care. Yeah. Right. So I always say, it's those things. It's making sure that, you're coming prepared to these things, that, when you are applying for a job, that you didn't just apply, but, you went on LinkedIn, you found out who that hiring manager is, you shot them a LinkedIn message and you said, hey, Noah, just as a heads up, I applied for this job. I think this is really, conducive to my skill set. I love what you guys are doing. I'd love just to talk more about how I think my candidacy is a great fit for you and your organization. Mm. That's one way to, all of a sudden differentiate yourself. Are you doing that with a handwritten note too? Yeah. If you're in market, are you going up to, some of the employees on game day and just saying, hey, how do I get a job here? Mm-hmm. Like, when you kind of boil it down to it, like, people want to be helpful, but they can't help people that don't know they need to be helped, It's well said. And so it's doing that. I think it's after the interview process, it's following up, it's continuing to be really specific and intentional with those messages, not just, hey, thanks for the time. It's, hey, no, I really appreciated the 30 minutes that you gave me, as busy as you are. This is a couple things I took away from our call.
Yeah.
Would love to continue the conversation if you think it's a fit. But like I said, I'm really excited about this opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, that persistence just shows how much you care about it, how much
Mm-hmm.
effort. And this is what I always say to our leaders here is like, if someone's not willing to give us effort during a 3-step interview process, what makes us feel like they're going to give us an effort, give us A+ effort for 3 years?
Yeah.
So
Mm-hmm.
it's just something to think about as you're going through this interview process is like, am I outworking everybody else
Mm-hmm.
through this process? Because that's a pretty good indication if you're going to put yourself in a position to win that job.
Yeah, absolutely, Gentry. I think too, the interview process is where you're able to display who you are and what you can bring to the table to the hiring managers. And it's really the only time you can do that. A resume speaks so much about who you are, but there's nothing quite like the interview where you're able to really display your skill set and why you should have that position. So to your point, it's the effort you put into it. It's the research you put into it. It's the follow-up is huge. We're huge on handwritten notes here at USG, talking about those as an elemental piece to making yourself stand out. Not many people write notes or send notes anymore, and it's a really great touch to kind of wrapping up the interview and following up. So totally agree
And I think,
on all those points.
not to cut you off, no, I think
Yeah.
I think a lot of people just think like, oh, that's pretty common. Like that seems so elementary, but you'd be shocked at how many people don't do the elementary steps that just put them in that position.
Yeah.
Right. Like we had a sales combine here a couple weeks ago. I think we had like 33 candidates here.
Wow.
I got one handwritten note out of the 33 folks.
Wow.
Like, that's just a perfect example, right?
Yeah,
So
it is a great example. And I think it speaks to just how those unique situations of being able to set yourself apart with something like a handwritten note, I think it does speak volumes to your character and the work you'd put in that position. That's well said.
Yep.
And Gentry, another tough part for young professionals is there are so many career paths within the sport industry. Obviously, for you, it was sales that has really been the steps you've taken to have a career in sports. So how can a young professional know which career path is best for them? How did you know sales was where you wanted to be?
I mean, I didn't until I was in it. Like I mentioned, I just assumed these places kind of filled themselves up, had no clue about sales.
Mm-hmm.
I remember my college professor being like, well, why do they need interns to help sell group tickets for this fundraising program? And I was like, I don't know, but I'm gonna go figure it out,
Yeah.
So, I think, every year there's more resources, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like there's, folks like you that are doing podcasts. There's folks like me that are putting content out on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
There's great websites out there like the clubhousecareers.com that's, putting out great information about like what these disciplines look like.
Yeah.
And so one, I think is just like, doing your research. I think that's a big piece of it.
Yeah.
Being true to yourself about like, does this job actually sound really fun to me? Is it fulfilling? Is it something that I think brings out the best version of myself?
Mm-hmm.
Two is like, I would just try to get exposed to those as much as you can.
Yeah.
Going into your college and, asking them to create an internship for you in a specific department that maybe they don't even have right now.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's, going to, spend a day with that pro or minor league sports team
Mm-hmm.
and just like shadowing somebody for that day. It's, sending 5-10 messages a week on LinkedIn, asking leaders in the space that, hey, can I pick your brain for 5 to 10 minutes, really just to learn more about you and how you got to the position that you're in.
Yeah.
And so I think when you do all of those things, like you just start to expose yourself and learn more. And like I mentioned, it's kind of on you at that point to say, hey, this is a career for me. This is a discipline that I'm really passionate about. And then, can you get an actual internship with those organizations?
Mm-hmm.
And so, I always say too, with internships, like if you find out that, you don't like that specific discipline by spending 3 months in it, that's a win.
Totally.
Right. Because you're not going to spend 3 years in a position that you don't like.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really important that, you really find that discipline that you want,
Mm-hmm.
that you don't use another discipline to get to another discipline.
Yeah.
Because, it's just not going to bring out the best version of yourself because you're not really passionate about that type of the work.
Yeah. That's so well said, brother. And, I think that's why experience and internships carry so much weight. Yes, it does help build the resume as you mentioned earlier is valuable, but I think even more than that, when you're in those internships and part-time experiences, you're able to think to yourself, okay, well, that marketing internship, I wasn't quite as invested as I was in that operations internship. And so I'm thinking operations is for me. And you can't learn that in a classroom, right? I always preach this to anybody I'm mentoring. You can't ever learn what is best for you and what you're most passionate about in a classroom setting. It has to be in the field. So I think, to your point, that's and really the only way in sports that you'll figure out what is best for you is taking those chances on experiences. It's well said.
And that's a topic I've been obsessed with for the last 2 years, is that
Mm-hmm.
you'll learn more by taking massive action from reading one book than reading 50 books.
Yeah,
And so
100%.
I think that's just such a good point, is like,
Yeah,
get in there, be okay with failing,
yeah,
just take action and kind of see where it leads you.
yeah, absolutely, brother. And another common challenge, I think this is a good follow-up question, is the early stages of a career. It's tough to land a full-time position. It takes, obviously persistence, as you mentioned, and it takes really stepping out to apply for certain jobs and internships. And so how can a young professional take advantage of the part-time opportunities and internships to hopefully land that full-time spot?
Yeah, I love this topic because I remember, like I mentioned, like I wasn't prepared really to get that internship in
Mm-hmm.
Tampa, right? I remember showing up on the first day, walking in with, this guy who was like the quintessential like sports management like person, right?
Yeah.
Like he went to this private school at the University of Tampa, like he'd had
Mm-hmm.
multiple internships, had some connections,
Yeah.
was really well spoken. And then here comes this, kid from, the Appalachian Mountains with this thick country accent from like an extremely small school.
Mm-hmm.
And, we walk in at the same time, and, all of a sudden we sit in this room with all the rest of the, 30 interns. And, there's the University of Florida, Florida State, the University of Colorado at Boulder. And like, I just felt like so inadequate, I guess, compared to everybody else,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like they're coming from these huge schools, like with
Yeah.
these great sports management programs, and then here I am.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I was about as raw as you could be going into that internship.
Yeah.
And so I remember being about 2 weeks into the internship, pretty down on myself. I was the
Mm-hmm.
youngest one in the internship class. I was 19, living in a big city, like didn't know anyone,
Mm-hmm.
didn't really have friends at the time yet.
Yeah.
And I was pretty, kind of, homesick, kind of down on myself. And I was talking to my dad, and he's like, and this is where it's going to come back to your question. He's like, listen, Gentry, he's like, it's 3 months. He's
Yeah.
like, finish the summer strong. He's like, all you have to do, he's like, if you'll just work hard, you'll be a sponge and let them know you want to be there. He's like, they're going to offer you a full-time job.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, if you just do those 3 simple things, like it'll work itself out.
Mm-hmm.
And, I've took that approach for the next, 9 years of my career,
Mm-hmm.
not just, that for, those 3 months.
Yeah.
But I made sure I was the first person in, the last person to
Mm-hmm.
leave. I showed up to training camp at, basically at 6:00 in the morning, just so I could get 30 minutes of role play, just to get face-to-face time with like the hiring manager.
Yeah.
I remember awkwardly walking into my boss's office and being like, hey, like, I want to work here full time. Like, what do I got to do? Like, what do you need from me? Like, I'll do anything. And
Yeah.
I lived in a printing room. Like, I lived in like, blacking out credit cards. I mean, just some of the small, just work that interns, typically get.
Yeah.
But I did it with a positive attitude. I did it with infectious energy and effort. And, I think that's what it takes. It's being proactive. Like,
Mm-hmm.
we've all seen those interns that are actually moving and doing stuff and being
Yeah.
really helpful and proactive. And we've also seen those interns that are on their phone all day or
Yeah.
on the computer just scrolling the internet,
Mm-hmm.
So, if you want a job, it's kind of up to you to go take it. But, I
Totally.
think that advice my dad gave me was, it's control the controllables. It's work
Yeah.
hard, be coachable.
Absolutely. And so well said too. And I think the amazing part of an internship is you are given an opportunity to be around individuals that you can learn a lot from, right? I'll give a great example from my experience. I was an intern with the Colts back in 2019, and their offensive coordinator at the time was Nick Sirianni, who was just the Eagles Super Bowl head coach.
Yeah.
And I was in charge of his room. I would take out his trash. I'd refill his Keurig. I'd wipe the tables down. And I made it a point to build a relationship with Coach Sirianni, right? I talked to him every day. I'd ask him questions about, man, how do you coach these guys? How do you, get yourself to a point of confidence where you're here and all these different things? And he eventually asked me one day to go pick up his family from the airport, right? And so I got to have a face-to-face with his family, and I got to build that relationship. And obviously now he's the head coach of the runner-up Super Bowl team, right? So
Yeah, it's crazy.
It's those opportunities where it's like, man, if I didn't step out of my comfort zone and ask him questions and build relationships, I would have never taken advantage of that opportunity of being in front of a potential future head coach. So
and being excellent in the job that you're called to be, right? Like that's not the most
exactly,
glamorous job,
not at all.
right? But I think that's one of the things that I really try to just to instill like every day in how I approach, my day to day, especially as a Christian in sports and in my professional career, is like, how do I be excellent at whatever the task is, no matter what the task,
100%. Yeah.
And so I think it's, kudos to you for doing that, because, a lot of people would be like, I'm taking the trash out for the offensive coordinator. Like,
Right.
This is what I'm doing with my summer, So kudos to you for practicing excellence, even when, most people wouldn't.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think to your point as well, like a lot of the internships that I've done involve what you mentioned, right? You taking the trash out, you're, shredding paper. Like, it's like, man, like I want to do the stuff that's fun, right? But it's like, that's just not really what the internship might be, right? And so you have to take advantage of just being there and even do small things like taking out the trash at a high level. So it's great advice. Great advice. And Jentry, I think a question that even I ask myself sometimes when I'm trying to mentor young people is, what are those skills that young professionals should possess and work to gain to have success in this industry? So if you could give maybe 3 skills that you would just encourage a young person to have or gain, what would those be?
Yeah, I'm not going to give the run of the mill just type of advice. Like, listen, if you're not going to be a hard worker, like you're not going to make it very far. If you don't have a positive attitude, you're not going to make it.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to give a little bit different, unique advice. I think the number one is like being intellectually curious. I think is a big game changer, especially as you grow your career. Like, I think the further you get into your career, I think it's really easy to kind of get stuck into your ways and say, hey, I've always done it this way. I've always seen it this way. But I think those continue to evolve. And I think, as you talk about like, hey, I'm mentoring other people. Yeah. Well, if you want other people to be better, you have to also focus on being better.
Absolutely.
And so I think that's that's basically a contract that you kind of have to sign with yourself to say, hey, it's on me to continue to keep getting better too. Yeah. And it's discipline to do it.
Yeah.
My schedule is crazy. Like my calendar's built for me, basically weeks in advance.
Yeah.
I still have to find that time
to
help improve myself. Right.
Yeah.
So I think, staying intellectually curious and always trying to seek about like, how can I be better? Like, what's that 1%? How do I find that? And then I think the second thing is like, to really think of your career much more from a chess perspective than a checkers perspective.
Yeah.
I think in today's society, in today's microwave society, like everybody wants that quick win. They want that instant gratification. They want to go to Instagram and show like, hey, I'm winning at life.
Yeah.
For sure. But I think those that can delay that instant gratification and really look at, the things that they're doing is much more for an investment for the long term. I think are really those people that set themselves up for a really long-term sustainable career.
Yeah.
And so I think your ability to do that is patience while also having a lot of ambition, which kind of doesn't make sense when you think about those things initially, because they don't typically coexist.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean they can't. Right.
Absolutely.
So I think those are 2 things that I think, in addition to all the, the key characteristics that we all have to possess in life, I think are some things that I would really encourage young people to think about, because, again, the other 99% aren't.
Yeah, and so well said. And I love your last point, too, of delaying the instant gratification. I think that's the hardest part about sports is that it is a very slow career. And what I mean by that is you have to be persistent in taking opportunities that, might be an internship, it might be part-time, it might be not exactly where you want to be, but it's going to help you get to that point. And so you have to just have patience, right? And so I think that's the hardest part about this industry is not everybody can wait, right? And like, all right, well, it's going to take 10 years for me to be whatever this is, right? So you see a lot of the leaders in sports, the individuals that are in director roles or are just leading in, VPs or whatever it is, they're a lot older in age, right? And it doesn't always have to be that way, but it sometimes just takes a long time. So to your point there, I think that definitely is a part of the skill set you should have is just having patience and staying the course. That's well said.
Yep.
Absolutely. And a great follow-up question, Jentry, is another common struggle of young people in sports is burnout, right? Especially in the early stages, because it's the truth is that pay is minimal, hours are long, and it can just be like, man, like, is this really what I want to do? And so how have you stayed the course in this industry for so many years? And how can our young professionals do the same and avoid that burnout?
Yeah. It's a great question. I think it's one that our industry, I think, talks a lot about, but probably still even needs to be more talked about,
Mm-hmm.
Um, for me, I guess I was lucky in the fact of like, I don't know what else I would be doing,
Mm-hmm.
if I hadn't,
Yeah.
like I was so blessed to get that opportunity. That's one of those situations where God's plans are bigger than our plans type of
No,
deal,
totally.
example scenarios that we see all the time.
Yeah.
Like I just wanted to be a minor
Yeah.
league or just around the college of where I'm from. And now I'm living in the biggest city in America,
Right.
so
Amazing.
yeah, again, like I don't know what I would be doing. Like when I
Yeah.
say I really don't, I don't.
Yeah.
And so, for me, I think a lot about it is, I was so blessed that I had leaders
Mm-hmm.
that took me under their wing,
Yeah.
that invested in me, that cared
Right.
about me, that, pushed me and saw something in myself that I didn't even see yet. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And, when I got back, after my internship, my first day in Tampa, like it was all about like, how do I get to a position where I get to pay that forward? How do I
Yeah.
get to help invest in others? How do I get to help others live a life that they didn't even think were possible?
Yeah.
And so, that's my why. That's what
Yeah.
drives me every single day.
That's so
You
well
know,
said.
I think when I ever get sideways on, like what's the point of putting all these extra hours in, or, we had 4 home games like in a week, 2 weeks ago, like those are long hours. Like I'm not wanting to wake up at 4:30 to still go to the gym,
Yeah.
but
Right.
and then it's another long day. Like we had an event last night, but for me, it's the impact that I get to have on people when they come into
Mm-hmm.
my office and say, hey, like you don't even know the impact you've made on me in just 3 months of
Yeah.
working here.
Yeah.
Or you see, one of your mentees get their first leadership opportunity, and then
Yeah.
they're getting to pass on values and beliefs that you've
Mm-hmm.
given to others. And so, I think there's a big difference between joy and fulfillment.
Totally.
Joy is fleeting, it's in the moment.
Yep.
Fulfillment's lasting, right?
Yeah.
And I think where I've always judged myself is like when my feet hit the floor every morning, like, am I excited to go do the work that I'm about to do?
Yeah.
And then on the back end of that is like when I go home and I throw my keys on the counter, well, I guess my wallet now, since I'm taking the subway all the time, it's like, did the work the work I did today, did that matter?
Mm.
Did that help
Yeah.
somebody? Did that help, future people? Like, was that fulfilling? Did I feel like I made an impact?
Yeah.
And, most of the time I've been very blessed, like for 9 years, like the answer to that question most of the time has been yes.
Yeah.
But anytime it's
Incredible.
not, then I know I need to recalibrate, right?
Yeah.
Like I know I need to realign.
Mm.
Uh, but I think that's what's really helped me. And I think, listen, like this career, this industry is not for everyone,
Yeah. That's well
and
said.
for everyone, they're not saying yes to those questions.
Mm-hmm.
And if they're not, I always encourage that you should go find a job that you do feel that way about,
Mm-hmm.
because we've got one life to live on this earth. Like,
Yeah.
what's the point of coming to work miserable? What's the
Mm-hmm.
point of not feeling fulfilled by your work? So,
Mm.
I
Well
think that's
said.
what's kind of guided me, and that's how I try to guide others.
Yeah.
It's a great question, Noah.
That's well said, brother. And I was really thinking too of, having a why, I think, is one of the most important aspects of I think being successful in sports. I mean, you think about the best athletes, right? I always kind of compare it to being an athlete because I think it makes a lot of sense to people. But you think about the best basketball players ever, right? Kobe Bryant being one of those, right? Kobe is obviously very talented, right? He was a very talented guy. And the reason he reached the heights that he reached was because of his passion for the game. He outworked
Yep.
everybody. He loved it. He had a why, right?
Yep.
There's a lot of guys that have come out of high school, as Kobe did, with a lot of promise that haven't really panned out, right? And not to say that they didn't have the skills, right? But maybe they didn't have the same passion. And so I think it goes for when you work in this industry, you're not going to be able to persevere through the long hours and the low pay or whatever else the challenge is if you don't have that why and that foundation. So I think it's great advice, brother, and definitely very applicable.
Yeah, it's a great example.
Mm-hmm. No doubt, brother. And I think another good follow-up to kind of this conversation we're having, Gentry, is you've been in this industry for a while. What are some of the challenges you have faced, and how can our listeners learn from those challenges?
Yeah, great question. Um, I think the thing that I always come back to is like just enjoying the journey a lot more. And listen, I'm a little bit younger for my role, and I would say probably most.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so I've sacrificed certain things to get to this position,
Mm-hmm.
quickly. It goes back to my favorite quote, right? Like you either sacrifice for what you want, or what you want becomes the sacrifice.
Yeah.
So I've had to, sacrifice holidays at home. I've had to sacrifice weekends, at the
Mm.
beach with my friends,
Yeah.
all of those things.
Yeah.
So I also don't regret, because I'm in the position I'm in because of those things.
Yeah.
But a lot of times I wonder too, like, could I still be in this seat
Mm-hmm.
and enjoyed that lunch with my coworkers a little bit more,
Yeah.
or, you know, took that trip back home for that, special event that I didn't,
Yeah.
because I thought work was just so important.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so, I think I would have just said, like, don't take yourself so serious. And I
Yeah.
think I think that's where my faith really helped me a lot, where
That's
I don't
good.
look at this as nearly as significant
Mm-hmm.
as I, probably used to, where I was, tossing and turning at night, thinking
Yeah.
about the only thing about work. And so,
Yeah.
I would say that, the first, 7 years of my career, I was a
Mm-hmm.
one-dimensional person.
Yeah.
My career was my identity. There
Mm-hmm.
was nothing else to Gentry besides the
Mm-hmm.
sports industry, sales leader,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so I think, for the last really, like, 2, 3 years, I've really focused on being a more well-rounded, more,
Mm.
more than a one-dimensional person.
Yeah.
And so I think you can do it all. I really
Yeah.
do. I think you can be a great, sports industry executive. I think you can have your fitness in a great place. I think you can
Mm-hmm.
be a great significant other. I think you can be a great follower of your faith.
Yeah.
But it takes intentionality,
Sure
right?
does.
Like,
Yeah.
it takes cutting out maybe some mindless Netflix some days,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
But I think you have to be intentional with everything that you do,
So good.
if you want to be great in all those areas.
So good, Gentry. And man, I love what you said of, you can't have yourself be so one dimensional, and you can't have that job be your identity. I think, I heard this one time, and I can't remember who said it for the life of me, but the question of, if a job was taken from you, if the thing that you spend the most time on was taken from you, who would you be? Right? Who would you be? And I think processing that question for me has given me a lot of peace in the work that I do. I'm sure the work that you do of, well, I'm more than my job. I love what I do, and praise God that I'm here and that I can use this. But that's not me, right? I'm so much more than
Yep.
just my job. And so I think, for our young people listening, and I'm kind of reiterating what you said already, but you are more than what your job says you are, right? You can be a great young professional, you can be a great sport industry leader, but that's not all of who you are. And so I think that can be a challenge. It can be a huge challenge of trying to overcome that, and finding out who you are outside of your career. So that's well
Yep.
said.
Yeah, and I guess that wake up call to me was during COVID,
Yeah,
right? Like, all of a sudden you have this crazy black swan type of event that comes out
yeah,
of nowhere.
yeah,
And, like, luckily I worked for an organization, in the Cavs, like, they took care of all their people through COVID, but, not
yeah.
every organization was that lucky,
Mm-hmm. It's
right? So,
true.
like, a black swan event could come tomorrow and take your job from you. Like,
Totally.
who are you going to be?
Yeah. Who are you
So,
gonna be? Exactly.
um,
Yeah.
we've seen it. Like, the first time, like, what was it? Like, fool me once, shame on me. Fool me twice. Well,
Yeah.
shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Right. So
Yeah.
that's kind of how I guess I looked at it. So.
Yeah. Absolutely, brother. So well said. And Gentry, the last question I have for you, and I think this is again a great follow-up to the challenges you've faced. You are a man of faith, as you've mentioned, a follower of Jesus. How have you been able to live out your faith in the workplace? I think that's a challenge for young people, especially in our network, who are trying to be great at what they do, but also live out their faith. How have you been able to do both of those?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's really one of the things I'm most passionate about.
Yeah.
Uh, for me, it kind of comes back to what we were talking about earlier. I think it's practicing excellence in everything that
Mm-hmm.
you do.
Yeah.
I think, even in the times where I've been in jobs where maybe I didn't feel as fulfilled, or I wasn't enjoying them as much, like,
Yeah.
it's still my job as a Christian to practice excellence,
Yeah.
and, to
Absolutely.
to lead that way,
Yeah.
and, to really be the example for so many others, right? Like, I had a,
Mm-hmm.
had a mentor, tell me one time, like, you may be the only Bible that someone ever reads,
Mm-hmm.
right? So
Yeah.
like, what are they reading?
Yeah.
And so for me, I hope it's somebody that they see that, lives out, the Christian values, that practices excellence every day, that
Mm-hmm.
invests in their people,
Yeah.
that treats people the right way.
Yeah.
Um, and so I think like you can show, hey, like I'm going to be the example for somebody,
Yeah.
like, who is that example for me looking for
Mm-hmm.
that Christian leader in the sports industry?
Yeah.
And so I think it was something early in my career I didn't see a lot of.
Yeah.
And I think the more you just kind of throw some inklings out there for other people to see, like, oh, he's a Christian too, like, oh, he goes
Mm-hmm.
to church, like,
Yeah.
I think that shows like, hey, there is somebody else like me.
Yeah.
That's what it looks like.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's the path for me to follow.
Yeah.
And so, that's what I try to do is just, show those glimpses, to people of like, hey, I am a Christian. This is how I try to lead.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and so I think it comes down to those things,
Yeah.
and so
Yeah.
the last thing I'd mention is that, you know, I think on our last question I mentioned it's like it kind of makes this thing not seem as a big of a deal,
Mm-hmm.
like in the grand scope of life,
Yeah.
like, this is my career and it's a big part of who I am and God's placed me in this position for a reason. But at the end of the day, it's only one part of my life,
Mm.
And so I
Yeah.
think I just try to keep that in the back of my mind as I'm going through the day on something that,
Mm-hmm.
you know, this huge fire drill that we're having, like it'll pass.
Yeah.
So,
That's so well said. And I love what you mentioned of, for a lot of people, we're the only Bible they will ever read as Christians in the sports world. And I think that's a blessing in my eyes. I think it's a blessing that, we get to display the character and nature of God to others. So I think that's really an encouragement to me, hopefully an encouragement to our listeners that you have been given a space in sports, not to just, be successful for yourself, but also help others have success, not just in career, but in their own spiritual journey, right? To find out who Jesus is and hopefully follow him as well. So,
yep.
well said, Gentry. Well said all around.
Appreciate it.
And Gentry, I really appreciate you taking time to join us today and being able to learn from you and your nuggets of wisdom. So, encouraging you to continue living out, just the character and person that you are. And we're wishing you well as you continue serving.
Well, like I said, I really appreciate it, Noah. I think you're doing a fantastic job here. Again, I think, like I said, you came extremely prepared, like you practice excellence just during this call and just like, just your mission in general. So, I love what you're doing. I hope, more people continue just to jump on board the train of everything that you're doing. Like, I know it's a lot of work. I know as someone who creates a lot of content, I don't think everyone realizes how much work goes into these things.
Yeah, totally.
So, kudos to you for going out there and doing it, like we talked about earlier, just like taking massive action. So I really appreciate it. Like I said, really humbled. If any of your listeners ever want to reach out and they need some advice, I'm certainly open to doing that. You can always reach me at my email, jmullins@bseglobal.net, or you can reach out to me on LinkedIn. Like I said, I post content every single day, so feel free to reach out there as well.
Absolutely. Awesome, Gentry. Appreciate you, man. If you want to get involved with Uncommon Sports Group and the mission that we are on to help you navigate the sport industry as followers of Christ, apply for our academy on our website at uncommonsg.org. That's uncommonsg.org. Be sure to catch new episodes of the Uncommon podcast every Thursday at midnight Eastern Time, as well as the full video episodes on our YouTube channel. Until next time, we pray that you will strive to be uncommon by glorifying the name of God in whatever you may do. See you next week.